Hey everybody, welcome. I'm just a peaceful giant reacting to history and thing. So, we're gonna watch one here, and it's about William Wilberforce. This was suggested for me and thing, you know what I mean? And I learned about him a little bit in high school or secondary school back on the island. So, we're gonna do an in-depth thing about who he was, what was his influence on British, and that whole area's history there. So let's go ahead and YouTube and simmer and see what William Wilberforce was all about.
He was an extraordinary man, and accompanied by extraordinary people who were fighting for this cause against the whole nation, being against them and the whole world, in fact.
That roll of paper reeks of rebellion! No matter how loud you shout, you will not drown out the voice of the people!
It's an interesting story that not many people know about, so if it could open people's eyes to that story, that would be great.
He lived in a terrible present where he could only see these great evils. And he knew that he must do something to end them.
Do you intend to use your beautiful voice to praise the Lord or change the world?
We humbly suggest that you can do both.
It's an extraordinary tale of sort of passion and triumph over adversity and opposition, political upheaval in England, wars being fought abroad, and always this man is continuing with his quest.
From the production company that brought you Ray comes another inspirational true story. Amazing Grace chronicles the legacy of William Wilberforce and his extraordinary contributions to humanity. This heroic story tells of a man and his friends who were called to put their faith in action to change the world.
Remember,
Okay.
God made men equal.
With friends rallying around him, Wilberforce launched more than 65 social initiatives, including the first Bible Society, the first Animal Welfare Society, the first free education movement, prison reform, child labor protection, and the first National Gallery of Art. Wilberforce found success as a politician at an early age. He was an exceptional speaker, witty, charming, and articulate.
We make a great mistake if we think of Wilberforce as someone who has a marble statue there in Westminster Abbey, who was someone that was unapproachable. Wilberforce's personality, someone who, it was said, touched life at so many points. That was what a contemporary said. I never saw anyone who touched life at so many points.
Why would we withdraw from America when half of the Americans are loyal to the crown?
Less than 1 in 4 Americans are loyal. If he called that half, I'd hate to be his wife and share half his bed.
However, he was not satisfied with worldly success.
How can we live in houses like this when others are living in boxes?
He felt aimless, searching for a purpose in his life. Early on, he had an encounter with God.
You found God, sir?
I think he found me.
You have any idea how inconvenient that is?
He felt compelled to pursue 2 great life objectives: the abolition of the slave trade and the reformation of society.
Like men.
So that's why we learned about him in secondary school back home, because he did that. Now there's a movement here to sort of, and for lack of a better term, I'm going to use this term because that's what they use here, whitewash the history of slavery and things like that. You know what I mean? And I've seen some of the things that they are putting forth. The Florida governor says that slavery was beneficial to the Africans, and in turn beneficial to the indentured servants and all the other people that came along here, despite the horrid conditions that they live under or they were brought here under. And And I think there's things like that is why people question, you know what I mean? Like some people would see this about Wilberforce wanting to do the abolition of slavery and would probably go, well, what was his motivations? Not thinking that maybe it's just humane, that, you know, he's coming from a humane perspective and not from a perspective where he could make money or just for a legacy, but maybe a genuine perspective. And I think when somebody does good, we need to stop questioning the perspective unless it's detrimental to the people as a whole, not just, you know, to the people, you know. Like for instance, the idea of this culture have a tendency to soften the blow of things, because even the fairy tales, they softened it to the Disney stuff and all of that now. But if you hear the true story, it was actually folklore stories, a lot of them, you know, from the countries that they adapted it from. And because they thought it was too violent, they softened it up supposedly to suit the culture. So that's kind of like how you look at what they're trying to do right now with the slave trade. They're trying to soften it up so it doesn't look bad, because I think in their warped mind, they think that if they soften it up, it's going to make conditions better now. But how could that possibly be when the mentality from the legacy of that event, historical event, is what's creating the division now? Because, you know, people who are passed down negative understandings of Africans or Irish or Roma people, you know what I'm saying? So you have to, and even if those people aren't assimilating to the culture, if the culture that they have is not affecting the culture that you have and they are coexisting along with you and they're not trying to like dominate, just let them live, you know what I mean? But I understand why now that they taught us about Wilberforce, because apparently he was a force in the abolition of slave trade, the slave trade. Let's see what else comes up here.
Any of us, I'm sure, I was sort of naive to Wilberforce's achievement in Parliament. I would sort of liken what they did to trying to take away the defence budget or to ban oil or something like that. So it was extraordinary what they achieved.
Wilberforce understood that in order to change something as entrenched as the slave trade, you'd have to change the hearts and minds of society first. What ensued was decades of defeat, failure, and illness. And in the end, 3 days before his death, he achieved his lifelong dream of abolishing slavery throughout the British Empire.
You've given your youth and your health for this cause.
The whole purpose of making the film, in a sense, is to do a story about how heroic politics can be.
There's a lot going on there, Sprat.
This is a fantastic story anyway, but the fact that it really happened, people need to know. Revolution. They're certain it's coming.
You talk about revolution as if it were a safe thing. An imperfect order is better than no order at all.
No, we must fight for a perfect order.
It was a really fascinating time period, the 18th century. I know it doesn't sound like it might be, but it really was. In between the French Revolution and in between all the political things that were happening.
There was so much going on. Europe was in turmoil, America was in turmoil. What you have to do is to put flesh on those bones, basically, and decide on the emphasis. With Amazing Grace, the idea was to begin it in the middle somehow, because it's a story that spans over 20 years. Wilberforce is deeply interesting to me because when you read about who he was, that in fact that he had a house full of sick animals that he used to look after, people would just come and sleep in his house and he didn't know who they were and he was sort of stepping over people. It was just a really chaotic man who just somehow managed to keep single-mindedly to one task.
He decided to reward various volunteers who worked for some quite precariously financed charities. Some brought deserving children from the poorhouse, others brought less deserving relatives.
Well, you should get some sort of
diary, sir. Yes, or more cooks.
Because the film portrays a momentous turning point in British history, director Michael Apted was committed to cast the film with British actors.
I wanted it to be a British cast because it was a British film and a great period of heroism in British history, so let the Brits make it. There was a British screenwriter, I was British, we decided to make it in Britain, so let's have British actors.
Apted's search for a young actor to portray William Wilberforce brought him to Ioan Griffith.
He wanted to do it, and we talked about it. He did some tests for me, and everybody was aboard. So I was able, because really of Ioan, to stick to the British and stick to the youthfulness of the cast.
A close friend.
Okay, I thought this was going to be a history of William Wilberforce, but it seems like it's the making of the movie of William Wilberforce. And for a minute there, I thought, I'm not going to, keep watching this because I want an actual history of him. But this is quite interesting, to see how they go about writing this man's story. And the reason why I say that is because Hollywood in particular tend to sensationalize stuff and take a creative license to add things that really don't happen, into the storyline. So I think this would be an interesting watch anyway. So I'm going to keep watching it. You understand what I'm going to say?
Friend and steadfast colleague to Wilberforce was William Pitt. He stood by Wilberforce's cause and became instrumental in helping the fight for the abolition of slavery. Wilberforce had in William Pitt no greater friend in his mission to end the slave trade.
Just think about this, Wilbur. The slave trade has 300 MPs in its pocket. It would be just you against them. But you could do it.
It's a fantastic story. Oh, yeah.
No. Similarities. I guess ain't nothing changed, huh? Because, the rich people who had the slave trade had the ministers in their pockets. They paid them up until, so that they could keep the slave trade going. Fast forward to now, we have like big corporation, oil companies, all of that is paying these politicians to keep their means of making money going. And it's always at the expense of poor people. Not, you know what I'm saying? There, it was at the expense of a race of people, but you ought to think too, probably at the expense of poor people, because who is making the big money? It's not the everyday walking man making the big money over there. It was the certain people making the big money, you know what I mean? And I could imagine the politics that was going on. If we take away the slave trade, they probably use the same argument. If we take away the slave trade, it's going to take away jobs, and your husband wouldn't be able to work, and blah, 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 and all of that stuff. I guarantee you they were using the same politics back then to keep it going.
Young people as well, because you have Pitt, who was the youngest prime minister in England's history, still is.
Billy, no one of our age has ever taken power, which is why we're too young to realize that certain things are impossible.
William Pitt, the youngest prime minister in British history, became prime minister at the age of 24.
Wow.
Wilberforce's best friend in the minds of many, certainly one of Wilberforce's close friends. They'd known each other as undergraduates at Cambridge. They came up through the political ranks together. They worked together for years to help end the slave trade.
If the House of Lords could hear the idiotic way we carry on, they'd ban anyone under the age of 30 from holding high office ever again. The world will know we mean business. And the world doesn't know yet.
It's quite daunting playing someone who has that kind of an iconic stature within British political history, but what's good about it in a sense is it gives us a very good eye into Pitt as a private man, and his relationship, his intimacy with Wilberforce in particular is a very strong relationship through the film. It's a story about his friendship with my character William Pitt, and also his relationship with his soon-to-be wife Barbara Spooner, and how they collided with this drive this very religious and devout man had with this cause.
Well, I'm playing a character called Barbara Spooner. She's the love interest, if you like. Hopefully the relationship that they have is perceived as being an initiating factor for Wilberforce's dedication to the campaign.
I was 14, reading your name in the papers, willing you to win. I told my friends there was actual slave blood in every lump of sugar.
She was, in real life, obviously a very devout evangelical Christian, and like Wilberforce. Firstly, we don't know that much about her, but I think that when I read the script her part was so interesting and that she'd been fleshed out a great deal and made to seem, quite an inspiring character.
If we had met in other circumstances, I would have told you how deeply I admire your tireless efforts to force our ridiculous parliament to abolish the slave trade.
Anything but politics. I'm vastly cured of politics.
Well, I would have been bored by botany.
So, even in other circumstances, it would be a disaster.
Veteran actor Albert Finney portrays Wilberforce's preacher and mentor, John Newton. Their relationship bolstered Wilberforce throughout his tireless struggle.
John Newton became, by Wilberforce's own admission in later life, a father figure for him.
John Newton was a slave trader, trafficking thousands of men, women, and children from Africa to the auction blocks. In 1748, a violent storm threatened to sink his ship.
And when it was about 45 or so, he had a crisis of conscience.
And the cry of his heart echoed the cries from the slaves.
The last person you should come to for advice. I can't even say the name of any of my ships without being back on board them in my head.
The seasoned sailor made a promise to God that if he survived, he would change his ways.
I wish I could remember all their names. My 20,000 ghosts.
He dedicated his life to his faith as a preacher and author of hymns. In 1772, Newton wrote a hymn called Faith's Review and Expectation, and it became one of the most popular songs in the history of the world, the most recognizable and most recorded, a song now known as Amazing Grace.
Oh, that's how that song came about. I've watched a lot of old movies and stuff, historical movies. And the idea of religion and Christianity back then was about helping people. That was the main thing. It's changed. It's not about helping people anymore. And a lot of people are going to disagree with me. But I'm looking at it from where I am. I'm not going to think about the rest of the world. It's about getting you to believe the same thing that they do. It's very, very, very political. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we got preachers up on there preaching about which party to vote for and stuff like that. So it's all about how getting power over people rather than getting people to be good people. Do what's necessary. I hear that so many times. Do what's necessary to make this culture great again and make it Christian again and pick up the arms and do all of that. You know what I mean? I'm not saying it wasn't like that back then, but correlation from where I was raised, religion was a lot about, peace and love and stuff like that. I mean, I don't even feel the peace around Christmas time anymore. Because there's always a war on Christmas, or a war on Jesus, or a war on this, and a war on that. There's no peace on earth, goodwill to men anymore. You know what I mean? And I watch a lot of the old historical stuff, and people could say they're just portraying it as that, as a goodwill type thing. But I would believe them if I didn't live it. On the island before I came here. On the island before I came here, it was like all about love and stuff. It's not anymore. You know what I mean? They really talk about the love of God to people. They talk about the vengeance of God towards people. You know what I mean? If you don't come here and believe, the vengeance of God is gonna smite you down, or nothing like if you come here, God's gonna love you and treat you with respect and all of that. It's like no, if you don't come here, he's going to smite you down. You will burn in the pits and all of that stuff. You know what I mean? And so the love and peace of it is not even there anymore. And it's all political now.
This song has had the power to give hope to the hopeless and soften the hearts of the hardened.
The first time I heard it, I associated it with the American South. And sort of allied to the sort of spirituals, and I'm sure it was a Baptist choir or something that I heard singing it. and thought what an amazing piece of work it was, and had assumed that it was African American, so it was quite a surprise.
Amazing Grace was sung by both sides in the American Civil War and used as a requiem by the Cherokee Indians on the Trail of Tears. Civil rights protesters sang it defiantly during freedom marches, and on that sweltering August day, when Martin Luther King shared his dream. The hymn rang out when Nelson Mandela was freed from prison, and when the Berlin Wall came crumbling down. And on September the 11th, Amazing Grace was sung to comfort a mourning world. It reminds us of a God of mercy who still lights the way of the lost and the blind.
And just back home, they sang that during the protests and stuff back there. You know, people sang that a lot. My mom used to sing that all the time. It's cool to know where it came from. I didn't think it was an American spiritual, a real African American spiritual. I just didn't. It was just, it had that old sound to it, you know what I mean? That meant it was before their time, you know what I mean? And when I say before their time, I mean, you know, because I mean, you hear, the main play time you hear it is when people are protesting and stuff, you know what I mean? But I heard it in churches. Excuse me, I heard it in the Catholic church back home. They sang that all the time, all the time. It's kind of cool to know where it came from.
I would like to dedicate this song to my honourable friend, His Grace the Duke of Clarence.
I think getting out and singing in front of my peers was equally as daunting as standing in Parliament and orating to the members. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, actually. I was singing Amazing Grace in a very aggressive manner and showing my peers that this is who I am, that Wilberforce had converted to the Christian faith. He wanted everybody to know that. It's a very sort of startling image and moment in the movie, but a very powerful one as well.
Amazing Grace follows Wilberforce's career through his 20s and 30s, when he and the supporters of his cause made the issue of slavery a national concern, not only in political circles, but also in the hearts of the people. Rufus Sewell plays the role of Thomas Clarkson. A contemporary of Wilberforce, he began a long crusade of his own against slavery.
And the character I loved because he was kind of a bit of an oddball, as you might be able to gather, and a real life force in his way, you know. They've got so much energy and not predictable and not obvious, and, you know, a great worker for the power of good, but a bit prickly and tricky in his own way, like a lot of people who are great humanitarians. And he's famous for just travelling the length and breadth of the country constantly.
And if you notice too, it was younger people that was doing it. Which, again, you find a parallel here, you know what I mean? Because it's the younger people who are fighting for the rights of gay people, really. They're the ones that uprising more, and the BLM movement, and any movement, the young people especially, which is kind of odd. Because, you know, the older people who are fighting the younger people were ones that were fighting against their parents. Okay, like for instance, now the older people that are like in their 50s and 60s and stuff, now they used to be, a lot of them used to be hippies. I see so many people here, and I know they were all hippies back in the day, and now they're like super conservatives. We can't do that. We got to do this, or we got to do that. And there's some of them that completely go over to the other side, you know what I mean? And there's an old saying that I hear a lot here, the hippies sold out. They were about peace and love back then, and now they're about money and staunch religious stuff. They say people usually go back to what they were raised as. Because, you know, I wouldn't say I'm getting a little, I've always been slightly conservative. But not so much conservative in political thinking, conservative in how we deal with the political thing, you know what I mean? How we deal with things, you know? I would rather sit down and have a conversation and try to hash it out before we go to war. These days it's like bomb them, shoot them, kill them. I hear that all the time around here. You know what I mean? Those damn Arabs, let's just kill them, you know? Those Muslims, let's just bomb them into oblivion. And it's older people are here saying that. People who sit down and talk about how the hippie days and how much marijuana they smoke and all of that stuff. You understand what I'm saying? They're the ones talking like that. And it's crazy how they just revert back to, as though they think the way their parents were is what was great. It's crazy.
All day, all week, all year after year, canvassing and getting people support and spreading the word. That's why Wilberforce and Clarkson were two separate forces that joined up. You know, Clarkson was already working on his own for a very, very long time. Clarkson was famously a very big man, and he had flaming red hair apparently, which we all tried, and I should have remembered when I tried to dye my hair red when I was 13. Doesn't really work on me. So we came up, this is the older version, because I think that he aged very quickly.
Michael Gambon, another veteran actor of stage and screen, plays Lord Fox.
I don't look like Lord Fox at the moment because as the character, I wear a great big powdered wig. Because that was the fashion in those days. So it's up here and it's all white and powdered. And I'm a member of Parliament, a member of the British aristocracy. I'm against the abolition of slavery, I think, to begin with, and I gradually come round. I get convinced by Wilberforce. He's a nice young man, and I back him in the end.
Nicholas Farrell plays the part of Henry Thornton, a member of Parliament, a fellow evangelical, and a founding member of the abolitionist movement.
And he is a great friend to Wilberforce, and he sort of bestrides both parts of the narrative in that he was an MP and was a part of the abolitionist group of which Wilberforce was the head, but he was also a great personal friend to Wilberforce. So when Wilberforce is ill, Henry invites him to his house to recuperate.
Parliament doesn't deserve you. Your last bill was defeated because 4 of your loyal supporters took free tickets to a comic opera rather than state a vote.
Does his best to find a female friend and a possible wife for him. So he's both on the personal and the political side of the story.
It seems my young friend opposite has a long-term strategy to destroy the very nation that spawned us.
Sounds familiar again. All this, man. All these political arguments is the same thing over and over and over.
With the majority of members of Parliament representing the sugar and slave trades opposing Wilberforce in the House of Commons, he faced a mammoth task in attempting to show them the human suffering that allowed these industries to thrive.
The slave trade in Wilberforce's day was incredibly entrenched within the British economy. Many of Wilberforce's most prominent colleagues in Parliament owed their personal fortunes to West Indian slave plantation holdings.
I'm playing a gentleman called Lord Tarleton, who, as we know through history, is a bit of a cad, a bit of a bounder. He's very much a dyed-in-the-wool Tory conservative. He is very much on the side of pro-slavery because he considers it at that time to be part of the economic strategy of Britain. So, I mean, that's how he regards it politically. He was a military man, first and foremost, before he went into politics, and he was quite famous as incidents reported of him in the American War of Independence, being quite heroic against the Americans. He led a few charges and he lost 2 fingers in the war with the Americans. He was very proud of that and often displayed his lack of the tops of 2 of his fingers in Parliament to show what an English hero he was.
No one's a goody-goody and no one's a baddie-baddie. I mean, the people who oppose the Wilberforce had very powerful arguments for opposing it. I think it makes the story more powerful if you can see how complex it is. There aren't real heroes and villains. You know, life is grey and difficult and complicated, but there are great things that have to be and can be done.
But is it though? Complicated because of the complications we create though. If we break it down to the pure human suffering of it, those are human beings, they're suffering, they shouldn't. Let's find other ways. So I guess it's complicated because we made it complicated because of capitalism to the highest degree. You know what I mean? The money making. But then again, we have to go, okay, who's really making the money? It's good for the economy, but who's making the bulk of the money? Because some people are living high and mighty, and we know any part of history, there's people down there struggling because they're working paycheck to paycheck every day. And does those poor people's lives depend a whole lot on the slave trade at the time? Or is it just a talking point? Now, we could break it down to like the oil now, you know what I mean? Okay, we could see that there's a lot of jobs to be lost. And we could see, you know, businesses failing because of it. But the consequences of it is what the problem is. Because, I mean, when they go drill oil in places, it destroys a country's... it destroys land. Land is where people have to plant food. You know what I mean? It destroys the ocean. We like to eat fish. I know they try to bring oil to Grenada, and then a lot of people is against it because they figure it will destroy the ecosystem around the island for plants, for sea plants and stuff like that. But you know, it's slightly different now because there is alternatives that can be progressed. But because people are making money off of the oil, they just don't want to change. Same thing with the coal here, you know what I mean? They're tearing down whole mountains and stuff. The common sense would tell you that that's not very good for the natural earth because we taking away something. When you take away something, or you destroy something to take away something, it's got to affect the natural existence of things, you know what I mean? I mean, just, okay, like for instance, if you take away one eye, you're only going to see in one eye alone because you don't have the other one. Are you going to, you could live a normal life, but you wouldn't be as efficient as somebody with two eyes, or same thing with two arms or two legs. You know what I mean? Now there's prosthetics and all kind of stuff, but you see the point I'm trying to make. You know what I mean?
Treatment of slaves and conditions aboard slave vessels were appalling. Men, women, and children were chained together in a cramped hold, left to huddle in dirt and disease. It was a former slave that would give the world an eyewitness account of the actual horrors of the slave trade.
The thing about Equiano that's so important, and there were other men and women of African descent that Wilberforce knew and worked with apart from Equiano, but Equiano was the face of the sons and daughters of Africa.
Before I traveled in a ship like this, I was a prince. In many ways, not unlike you.
He's someone who had known great hardship, who wrote a powerful narrative of his life.
Okay, I'm gonna have to search up this guy. See? First time I've ever heard of him. So yeah, I'm glad I watched this now. I'm gonna have to look up this guy, you know what I mean? They had actual people who experienced it going to parliament and discussing the horrors of it. So, you know, and it's important to get the information from those who experience it and not those who could interpret it whatever way they want to. You understand what I'm saying? And you find that right now, you know, and kind of with racism here. Like if I tell somebody that I have this, this event happened to me, where something racist is said to me, they're gonna go, oh, it's not that bad, quit complaining, blah, 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 blah. I assume a lot of that was going on there. Oh, he's just exaggerated, you know what I mean? The difference is back then, as far as this movie is concerned here, or this documentary is concerned, is the rich people that's going like this. Poor people are doing that here. You know what I mean? Instead of finding a compatibility in our struggles, which, you know, I think the struggle now is between rich and poor. I mean, some people might say, oh, that's just a whole cliche statement, but I really think that's what's happening right now. That's what was happening back then. I think the difference is from between then and now is they hid it well back then. Because we have stuff like all this social media and stuff, it cannot be hidden that well. Somebody's going to get on there and go, and put it out there. So now it's all out in the open. So now we know. We keep picking sides, and I'm going from the perspective of where I am. We keep picking sides. Like, for instance, I would say certain things, right? And I'll have conservatives agree with me, and I'll have liberals agree with me, and I'm trying to say, listen, man, we agree on the same thing. The problem is you're picking sides, but we agree on the same thing. Pick the human side and stop picking the political side.
Equiano is a profoundly important figure, and he was certainly, an immense figure in the vanguard of the anti-slavery, anti-slave movement.
Equiano is a poet. He's someone who worked very hard to help Mr. Wilberforce and all the people who were trying to do the abolition. He also, have great story. Wrote a book and sell it everywhere by his hand. They put irons to the fire and do this to let you know that you no longer belong to God but to a man. I think it's very important, and I think it means something for Africa. And I didn't know before this movie, England was first, they do the abolition before France. I didn't know it.
It's kind of, oh man, this is so poignant how he put it, you no longer belong to God, you belong to a man. But then they were still trying to convert the slaves. So it's kind of like what I've been thinking the whole time. The religion was used as a way to pacify the slaves. And I used to think that one of the reasons why they did that was to, okay. Let me redo that thought. They also did it to poor white people, because poor white people, poor non-slave people were taught the same thing. And I used to question, how come I come up here and all these evangelicals got the vengeance of God and the warrior mentality, but I'm from a predominantly country of African descent, and we were taught peace and love and stuff like that. And I used to think, well, that was done deliberately so that we would be passive. But then it works on every race and creed. So then we go back to the rich poor thing again. You know what I'm saying?
A part of Equiano was Youssou N'Dour's first performance as an actor. A Grammy Award-winning musician, N'Dour is one of Africa's foremost artists. The intricate rhythm of N'Dour's African music became an inspiration for composer David Arnold.
I thought that was inspirational for me in terms of what the music should be, because I thought, well, this is a thriller. It's set in a sort of very formal, quite starchy, I suppose, British parliamentary environment. So if we brought the sound of black African people into the Houses of Parliament, against people arguing for why slave trade actually is quite a good thing, how that would enrich our experience of the tragedy of the entire period. So we have this kind of very formal sort of British sort of orchestral aspect, and then we have our sort of African percussion and this wonderful African choir who bring the truth, really, I think, the emotional truth. So I think what I'm hoping that it will do is to inform us spiritually through hearing these voices alongside the choir. It's not just the dilemma of the white British aristocracy that is the subject of the film. There's also, the actual truth of it is the human cost, exactly.
I'm going to do this, It's very, very tricky. I'm doing this without any of this not making a noise. It's just the only people speaking will be Nick and you. Let's just practice. The director's job is to orchestrate everything. The hair, the makeup, the costumes, the design. And I had a certain vision for the piece that I wanted to make it accessible to a modern audience. I didn't want to make it look like a regular period film. I didn't want it to look like a chocolate box.
Recreating the late 18th century proved to be a challenging task for the production company because many of the historic locations no longer exist.
We have a very good designer, a very good design team, and they've spent a lot of time and money making it authentic. London is quite tricky now, particularly for Georgian London, because everything's been gentrified. But there are places, and we've found them. The church that we're filming in, which was the main church for the Naval Dockyard, it is absolutely perfect for what was the House of Commons in the 18th century, which was based in Westminster, but in an old church called St. Stephen's. The windows and the balcony here are remarkably similar. If you look at the etchings of the House of Commons at that time, it's extraordinary how similar it is.
I didn't want to make it objective. I didn't want to take people outside it. I wanted the audience to feel they were in the middle of it. So I've shot it like a contemporary film, but also it has to look a bit like a contemporary film. We have to honour the period.
I looked into...
And that's one of the reasons why I want to visit Europe so bad, you know what I mean? Because there's pockets of old places like that, you know, that I just want to go sit in and close my eyes and sort of take in the history of it all, you know what I mean? Close my eyes and imagine the people of different periods of times walking through there, you know, figure out what their lives were like. I used to do that a lot back home. We had the old fort, St. George's Fort. It's from like 1600s, 1500s, and I used to go sit there and imagine like the British garrisons and that were walking through the fort and stuff, and the Spanish and the French and stuff like that. And of course, you know, when I went to Leapers Hill, where the native the Caribs jumped off and tried to envision them running, you know, to escape and stuff like that. The best way that I could walk in history.
All the pictures that exist of Wilberforce, of the House of Commons at the time, a lot of the great cartoonists, political cartoonists, Gilray, Rowland,
Excuse me.
who give a really real little bite. It's a bit like photographs today in the newspaper, so you get a really good sense of what was going on. And that was the basis of research for this.
In fact, by virtue of putting on the costume and being made up to look a certain way and have a wig put on and that look a certain way, it does change you from the outside inwards.
I said I want to have red hair for no real reason, really. Barbara Wilberforce didn't have red hair. Just fancied a change.
I was grateful for what was sort of thrust upon me was that we had to shoot it in the winter here, but it stopped it having a very kind of pastoral, sunny, gorgeous look. You know, I shot a lot in rain, I shot a lot in dull, bad weather, a lot in wind, and it gives it a kind of grittiness and graininess.
The legacy of William Wilberforce will live on forever, but unfortunately, the fight to end slavery still goes on today.
Hi, I'm Zach Hunter, and I'm the spokesperson for the Amazing Change campaign. It's a campaign inspired by William Wilberforce to abolish modern-day slavery. Many people don't know that slavery still exists, but it really does. You know, there are kids being held all over the world, rolling cigarettes or working in brothels in really bad situations. That's the problem that we're trying to solve through the Amazing Change campaign. Let me tell you what slavery looks like nowadays. It can be anything from whole families working in agricultural plantations to little children rolling cigarettes all day long. Slavery is still just as horrible as it was then. I believe that my generation can be the generation to abolish slavery once and for all.
The year 2007 is not only the year in which the film Amazing Grace will be released, it's the 200th anniversary of the abolition of the slave trade. How do we mark an anniversary like that? A watershed event in human history. Well, to my mind, the way is to become ourselves agents of change, to begin to pursue building the good society.
War changes everything, even friendships. Yes, especially those. So you will keep your precious conscience intact and let the rest of us do the war's dirty work. Odd people do good things. There is good and bad in all people, and that's why it's worth appealing to the good in people. Some prickly characters do great things, and some quite affable and nice characters do bad things. We're a mixed bunch, you know, and this is about human beings doing something great.
I think young people will be amazed by it, won't they? I mean, young people, they might not know much about it. When you think about it now, you think how appalling it is that black people should be slaves treated like that. So I just think to young people it would be a real eye-opener.
I feel like I've learnt a lot about late 18th century history, hopefully. More than anything, I think, you know, you can tell because I'm rabbiting on about it. When you make a film or you learn a bit about someone like Wilberforce and Pitt and Clarkson and Newton and all the people involved in this film, you think people do change the world. They can change the world if they set their minds to it. You know, that's an inspiring thing. So, yeah, I think it was a great thing for me.
This movie, you know, is very important for the young people to know exactly the story. Even we're trying to move forward about, you know, a lot of things in Africa.
And still, after all the badges, the petitions, all the speeches and the bills, ships full of human souls in chains sail around the world as cargo.
There is still slavery today. That's the terrible fact, and in many different forms. So the fact that a political campaign like that can change things, I think, should give heart to anyone who now looks at the world and thinks it's hopeless.
And what was great about Wilberforce, though, although he was a very strong Christian with a very strong moral purpose and probably disapproved of a lot of way things were done, nonetheless he was in the world. You know, he moved in political circles. He was able with Pitt to form alliances. He was out there working for a greater good, working to do something that he thought was very important and powerful. To a modern audience, that's very relevant when you can see how politics maneuvers itself, how self-interest can be used to a good advantage and not just to a bad advantage.
Bravery is a good thing, and standing up for your own rights and other people's rights takes courage, but one will reap the rewards in the long run. No matter how loud people shout you down, just persevere and your message will get across.
Oh man, that was good. See, this is the thing, okay? We get caught up so much in our, and I'm speaking from my perspective, get so caught up so much in the history of things that we don't think those things actually still happen. And I mean, we know they are, but we can't fathom the idea that it could be just as bad as back then. How could they get away with that stuff in these times of social media and stuff like that? It's really easy because like people have YouTube channels and they have this and that, and it's a matter of picking a side again. You just pick the human side, man. You know what I mean? And when I started this channel, I wanted there to be a purpose in this channel. I didn't just want to come on here and watch movies, watch videos about history and you know, pontificate about history itself and the great readers and all of that. I wanted to have it so that we don't make the same mistakes. That's why I talk the way I talk in these videos. History should be a vehicle that we learn our mistakes from. Greed is a hell of a thing. Because once again, the slavery that's happening now is because of greed. Somebody's making money. And if you keep people downtrodden, they themselves will do anything for money. So now, quite frankly, people are working for slave wages, trying to survive. But they think that life is better than it was because they get a little penance from it. And of course, too, when you think about it, where do you start? Where do you start to fix it? I personally think we start with the humanity of it all, you know what I mean? That's why we have to tell stories like this one. Of course, I'm going to look up that African slave that was in cohesion with Wilberforce. I want to tell his story too, you know. I want to see what his story was all about. I hope you guys learn something from this. And I hope someday we could, like, I know you're not going to stamp it out because there's always going to be greedy people, but make it to the point where everybody, that people aren't suffering in mass because of greed. If you all found this interesting, please comment down below, tell me what you think. Also drop a like on it, share the video, man, you know what I mean? Let's share that message of peace and love and humanity around the world. Let's do that. Share the video. You understand what I'm saying? Comment down below with it too, so that people could read the comments and see that there's a whole lot of us that doesn't want this happening anymore. In this world, the bad people speak the loudest. That's why everybody's paying attention to them. That's why we have such a war-like type mentality going on. Those that are making the money from it are the ones with the means and but we have the means too. We got YouTube, we got Facebook, we got Twitter, we got this, we got all of that. We have the means too. So let's just shout it out, you know what I'm saying and thing. I'll leave a link in the description to this video, so y'all could go check it out and thing. You understand what I'm saying and thing? And you know, let's take care of each other, alright? Cool runnings.